Greetings to all of you members of Class A of Discourse Analysis. We are Group One, and uh, we are going to talk to you about discourse analysis and narrative. As we all know, according to the material, narrative has been one of the major themes in humanistic and scientific thought since the mid 20th century. Uh, we are going to divide the presentation into 8 subtopics. The first subtopics is structuralist narratology, which is going to be discussed by me, Diaz Adrian, and then the second one is oral versions of personal experience, and then other work on the structure of narrative, and then why people tell stories, and then the development of narrative skill and style, and then variation in narratives or in narration, and then narrative research across disciplines, and the last one is current state of the field. Now let's first talk about structuralist narratology. Well, there are two approaches to structuralist narratology. The first approach is of Vladimir Props. Vladimir Prop, in Morphology of the Folktale, which analyzed many Russian folktales, makes claim that all folktales have the same syntagmatic deep structure, and then it also has the same sequence of functions or meaningful actions by the characters. And then the second approach is of Claude Levi-Strauss. His interest was in describing the abstract elements of meaning that are expressed in myth. And he made a claim that traditional narratives around the world all deal with a limited number of basic themes. Both of these, both of them share two assumptions. The first one being there are abstract levels on which structures and meanings that seem different but are actually the same. And then the second similarity is that narrative can be separated from the events it is about, as it is discussed in the work of Émile Benveniste, who distinguished between histoire, the event, and discourse, the presentation of the event in a narrative. The second one is going to be carried out by Dimas Prasetyo.
Okay, so next is oral version of personal experience by Lebov and Walensky, which will be told by me, Dimas Prasetyo. So according to Labov and Walensky, a clause in personal experience narrative can serve one of two functions. The first one is referential clause that have to do with what the story is about, like the events, characters, and setting. And then the second is evaluative clauses that have to do with why the narrator is telling the story and why the audience should listen to it. And then, based on Labov and Walensky, there is most of personal experience narrative is complex with the following function, often in this order. Like first is the abstract, a clause or two at the beginning of a narrative summarizing the story to come, and then orientation, introduce the characters, and then complicating action, which is narrative clauses that recapitulate a sequence of events leading up to their climax. The next is the result of resolution, release the tension and tells what finally happened. Evaluation, stating or underscoring what is interesting or unusual about the story. And the last one is coda, providing a short summary or connecting the word of the story with the present.
Hello everyone, I am Abdika Amrullah. My student number is 053. I would like to continue the presentation and I am going to cover two subtopics. The first is other work on the structure of narrative. We know that work by Labov on narrative is influential, at least among English speaker countries. However, He's not the only one who worked on the structure of narratives and stories. Some scholars are also conducted research on how people and another information producers make and understand stories. Let us say the works by Van Dyck and Keynes on 1977 and 1908, and Keynes and Van Dyck on 1978. It is a work about the transcription of semantic macrostructures and macro rules that model the comprehension in understanding stories. Also, works by Fillmore, 1982, Rumelhart, 1980, De Background, De Brande, 1982. They are produced work about the story of grammar. And regarding the works on story of grammar, there are also the same work with more ethnographical purpose by Polanyi in 1981 and 1985. It shows how an adequate paraphrases of conventional stories told by Americans can be a way to identify the most basic statement of their belief about the world. The other works, it is the first about line by line analysis of structure narratives, the structure of narrative. It is line-based transition system that states oral discourse is not produced in paragraph. The idea is widely adopted in narrative research, and there are works by Kafi and in 1980s, Caesar in 1982, Tedlock 1983, and by Woodbury in 1987. These scholars are conducting the works on line-by-line analysis. And one of the most influential works on line-by-line analysis is a work by Del Hymas in 1981. It shows that narrative American myths was performed in poetic lines and stanzas which marked by grammatical parallelism. And the second work is structural approach on how storytelling is embedded in its interactional context. It examines about the fact that structure of stories are the reflection of stories is reforming social actions and how audience involved in the construction, whether directly or not. The example is works by Polanyi in 1985. It shows about the response by audience may change the storyteller's point of the story. And the work by Godwin in 1982, which examines the initiation of the discourse among urban African Americans. It shows how the framing of the gossip dispute story in larger social context may determine the way of telling the story, understanding the story, and reacting to the story. And the last is Watson's in 1973. Who articulate the work of Labov with Bourdieu by Bourdieu 1945 and 1950. It suggests a way to describe how social context of which the story performed may influence the structure of stories. The third is works that examines the linguistic features that are the characteristic of the narrative discourse. There are the collective works by Wolfson in 1982, Schifrin 1981, Johnson 1987. These works are focused on the use of present tense rather than past in historical text, the text which will refer as historical present. And the work by Tannen in 1986 and 1989, it focused on how the reasons in the usage of word by storyteller, the usage of an familiar word to the storyteller itself in the dialogue of the character in their story. And the work by Romain and Lange in 1991, who discussed the history of quotative usage, and also the work by Ferrara and Bell in 1995. And the last is work by Young in 1987, who discussed the strategy which is negotiated by audience and teller about the transition between the word of the story and the real-time interaction. And the fourth section is why people story. To understand the motive, goals, and reasons why do people tell stories, in discourse analysis, we are questioning about the functions of narrative thought. And the functions of narrative thought, it is answered by some scholars. There are Rosen in 1988. He introduced autobiographical impulse. It is a motivation to tell the life story comprehensively. The life story is, which is known by personal narrative, a story that comprehends the people as individual and as a member of groups. The next work is by Linde, 1993, and it is states that an individual needs to have a coherent, acceptable, and regenerative life story in order to be exist socially in sense of good, proper, and stable. The next is work by Zifrin, 1996. It shows how individual identities are created by two storytellers by situating themselves in the family and society by the choices in the narration. And the work by Johnson, 1996, it is about the self-expressive reasons for storytelling styles that differs on every individual. And the other function of story, it is create group coherence, which created by the set of stories, the shared ways in telling stories, and the shared use of stories. The scholars that work on research about the topics are Christian Bott and Gimlet in 1974 and Darnell in 1974, which studies of the function of narrative and speech events in which the narrative was central. Also studied by Salon and Solon 1981, Basel 1986, Patrick and Pei Jackson 1996, which studies the use of narrative in various parts of the world. The last function of the stories is the shared use of narrative is constitute and maintain the smaller scale of group. And the scholars that work on these topics are Bauman in 1986. He works on this. He showed that stories and storytelling events to negotiate social relations in Texas. And the work by Johnson on 1990, it is the work about how storytelling creates community and sense shares of place in the American Midwest. Also work by Suman in 1986. Works about the uses of stories by urban adolescents, and works by Curtis in 1996. It is work about telling stories, defines the interrelationship of a group of female friends. And that is all from me. The next will be continued by my group mates.
Okay. And the next one is about the development of narrative skill and style. My name is Rizky Nugraha, and my student number is 090. So it is stated that every young children appear to want to talk about the past, proposed by Miller and Sperry in 1998. And then narrative skill develops along with the age. The more older and mature children are, the more complex and advanced narrative structure they use. So the example is the theories by Kelnan, Romain, McCabe, Peterson, Hudson, and Savio. In Kelnan, in 1977, it states that younger children implying their feelings and rarely creating speech, while the older children relying on explicit strategies such as telling how they felt and constructing dialogues. And the next one is the works by Romain in 1984, which explained that the Scottish pre-adolescent usually evaluate strategy, their evaluative strategies vary with each other, but most of it is the tend to use simple syntax by avoiding passivization and subordination. And the next work is by McCabe and Patterson in 1991, which explains that pre-adolescents usually uses and, then, and because to arrange their stories. The last one is by Hudson and Saville in 1991, which explains that uh, children develop skills such as remembering and representing events, constructing narrative microstructure, uh, the use of tenses, aspect, pronouns, anaphora, and all of them are interpreted all together. So the ability is developed within the age. And then cognitive and linguistic ability are learned first. And then children will eventually know functions of narratives through the socialization process. Narrative styles depends on community. Each community has their own style which differs each other, as the example of the works by these writers or authors. The first one is the work of Health in 1982 and in 1983, which explains that working class community in southern US, which divided into white children in Rockville and African American children, are explaining their narrative in different way. The white children in Rockville talk about factual stories that ends with moral, while the African American children tells about the fantastic tales. And the next one is the work by Michael and Collins in 1984, which explains that this kind of socialization and of community have implication on children's success in school. The white children knows how to tell sharing time stories, while the black children are don't tell that kind of story. So it is different between the two. And then we move to the next topic, which is um, variation in narration. So when we talk about variation, it is mean that there are a considerable amount of narrative variations. This kind of situation are mainly caused by the cultural background of the speakers, which is different from one place to another. Here are some examples. The work by Prop and Leibov, which was already explained by my friends about the morphology in folktales and pen or personal experience narrative. It is more of a chronological process, while Baker in 1978 explained that the Eastern narrative are different compared to Western. In Eastern, for example, in Japanese, they use spatial coincidence where the characters from different eras come together in the same place via rising tension leading to cathartic climax. And then it is also stated by Schaeffer and his co-workers in 1980b that language also influences narrative variation. For example, as shown by Clancy and Tennant. The work of Clancy in 1980 explains the differences between Japanese and English. In Japan, both of them uses nominals in different way in the introduction of characters. And the work of Tennant in 1980 explains the differences between Greek and American narrative. In Greek, they tend to more uh, dramatic into a more dramatic story, while the American one is is aiming for referential completeness and accuracy in their storytelling. And the next one, there are also cultural differences in the function of narrative, as shown by the works of these people. The first one is Garland in 1981, which explained about the Athabaskan community, and the next one by Plum Kulka in 1993, which tells the differences between American and Israeli families. American families tend to ritualize the telling of stories about the day and mostly are done by children, while the Israeli families is more collaborative and more and the story is more distributed among family members. And then the next work is by Ed Lewis in 1991, which explained about African American women, which the women in African American have different personal storytelling than most of other women. And the next one is the works by Reisman in 1988, which explained the Anglo-American and Puerto Rican woman uh, are influenced by social class and ethnicity. So social class and ethnicities are factors in women's different experience and recountings. And then the last one is about uh, the last two one is about gender and situation. Gender influences narrative construction and expression, as shown by Johnston in 1983, which is tell that with Western men and women have different way to tell the story. The men focus on context, while the woman focus on community. So the story are different via plot, detail, and dialogue. And the next one by Porter in 1988, which explains that woman life's history influences their style of narrative. The past and present experience play important role to into the structure of the narrative. For example, the woman act in different way as mother, daughter, and woman. So it is kind of interactional complex of the conversation. And the next one is how a situation, purpose, and medium affects narrative variation. As shown by Pratt in 1977, that literary narrative and spontaneous conversational storytelling actually both of them are different, but they are somehow are similar in certain ways. It is about the audiences interpret violations of the expectations. So the violation here are intention of floating conversation and done with purpose rather than mistakes. So the way they interpret the narrative is different. And then the next one is the work of Walker in 1982, which is about the code situation. And then the last one is about the work of Stahl and Tanner, which tell the difference of narrative in oral and written. The differences here is in the what is get told and how it is get told. So oral and written is different. And then the next one, we will talk by my friends about the narrative research across disciplines.
Okay, so our next topic here is about narrative research across disciplines. uh, the first one is new historicism. It is a um, it is a term coined by Cox and Reynolds. Cox and Reynolds argue that history can only be selective storytelling about the past. And then there is contemporary theoretical framework, so that each contemporary theoretical framework, which are typically used in research in literary and cultural studies, for example, like feminism and Marxism. So contemporary theoretical frameworks makes claim about narrative, also makes claim about narrative. And then there is an anthropology. In anthropology, Turner argue or showed how societies make the world coherent by constructing dramatic plots to model human actions. And then the last one is narrative analysis or the narrative study of lives. So it is a qualitative social scientific research based on life histories that is challenging the methodological hegemony of quantitative research paradigms in disciplines such as education, sociology, and psychology. The last subtopics will be delivered by my friend Naufal Sandi. Naufal Sandi, time is yours.
Hello, my name is Naufal Sandi Prayoga, and my student number is 091. Um, and I'm now going to talk about the current state of the field. So, how is the state of the narrative structure, especially in these modern times? Well, for the records, discourse analysts they always continue to enrich their understanding of the narrative structure and its functions. They also try to examine new devices, asking new questions, and they also look at narrative functions in the newer context. And discourse analysts, especially those who focus on narrative structure, they are now not only holding on to the traditional explanatory variables such as place of origin, social class, gender, ethnicity, so on and so forth. They also now try to consider new and different ways of accounting for variation. For variation, and discourse analysis now they are thinking more about things such as first one is how language etiology affects linguistic choices according to Schiavelin in narrative and elsewhere. And second is the role played by situated changeable social identities that can be expressed through fleeting or long-term mixings and borrowings, according to Lepage and Taburit Keller. And also works on formal modeling of narrative for computational purposes that continues and grows in sophistication, drawing on new ways of explaining dynamic systems such as chaos theory, according to Wilgen. And as society, as human develops in the way they talk, in the way they act, and in the way they create languages, discourse analysis also follows through in accordance to this development of society. And now the discourse analysts they pay more attention to the political effects of narrative. So then they also see narrative more and more as a way of constructing events and giving them meaning. So and give them boundaries and significance. And I think that's about all our discussion regarding discourse analysis and narrative. Thank you for listening and thank you for the attention.